You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week we're joined by Dr. James B. Adams, a President's Professor at Arizona State University and leader of the Autism Asperger's Research Group. As a father to an adult daughter with autism, Dr. Adams has dedicated much of his research to uncovering biological causes and innovative treatments for autism. Today, we'll explore groundbreaking work on the gut-brain connection, including a new diagnostic urine test and microbiota transplant therapy, MTT, which has shown promise in improving gut health and autism symptoms. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. James B. Adams.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, I'd love to give all of our audience a little bit of a background, because oftentimes is that the work that we're doing is driven by our passion. It's driven by things that are important to us. And maybe you can give us an understanding of what drove you to really dive deep into that gut-brain connection, or even just autism in general.
Sure. Well, because I have a daughter with autism, diagnosed 31 years ago, and we were told, severe autism, severe intellectual disability. She couldn't talk, didn't understand what was said to her. And so that was a real challenge for us. But my wife and I were just determined to love her and accept her as she was, but at the same time, try to give her as much help to reach as much potential. So still at age 5, she couldn't talk. She'd take me by the hand to the refrigerator, couldn't even point to what she wanted. So she'd say, I would say drink, she'd say cuh, and then slowly over a few years with ABA, we built it up to want drink, I want drink, please. And then we began also looking into many nutritional and biomedical interventions, and those slowly, gradually helped. Finally, at age 12, she was able to say meaningfully, I love you. And that just was such a blessing. But we also then began realizing more and more about the biological nature of autism and the causes of it. So I began a study of a vitamin mineral supplement for children with autism. It was surprisingly successful. So we went on to do several more studies of that. After that, we then founded a nonprofit, Autism Nutrition Research Center, that distributes that supplement to families in the U.S. and around the world. And we've done many studies, continued to improve it. But also at the time, my daughter had some early constipation issues, which resolved after treatment. But we discovered many other children did too. And then 14 years ago, we published a paper, one of the first ones, showing that a very strong correlation that the kids who had worse autism, had GI symptoms, had worse autism. There's a very strong correlation. And also I was aware of, at the time, of a study that had been done showing that if you gave an antibiotic to kids with autism, a special antibiotic called vancomycin, great improvements in GI symptoms, great improvements in autism symptoms for the 8 weeks of treatment. But then when they stopped treatment, all the benefits were lost within a few weeks. The GI benefits, the autism benefits were lost. So it showed us that important study said, because this antibiotic only works in the gut, it's not absorbed into the rest of the body, it shows us that it was the gut bacteria causing these problems, and that we can get rid of them, but they will also grow back when we stop treatment with an antibiotic. So we need to reseed the gut with beneficial bacteria. And that's what led us to our microbiota transplant.
Yeah, and I mean, your story of watching your daughter probably, through constipation and other sort of gut-related discomforts, that's pretty common, I'm guessing, is that a lot of children have those same symptoms. And I think the clinical field used to kind of look, well, maybe it's because they have a blockage because they're controlling, or they're trying not to have to use the restroom, and that's causing more problems. And they thought through it behaviorally, but it sounds like what you're telling us is that it's there could be a behavioral component, but there's also a biological component that we need to be looking at and addressing in order to take away discomfort. Are there other signs that you'd be saying, hey, you know what, if your child is experiencing some of these things, there's probably a gut issue going on?
Yeah, so a lot of it is we looked at the medical histories of the kids with autism who had gut problems, and we discovered many of the abnormalities as we suspected. Many of the mums had uh, factors that would make for worse gut bacteria. You inherit much of your gut bacteria from your mother, but also C-section birth. Then you don't get the bacteria from a normal vaginal birth. And so that's a factor. Also, after a C-section, the mother's given antibiotics, and those pass into the infant and disrupt their initial gut bacteria. And then we found that many kids with autism have much shorter periods of breastfeeding, perhaps just because they're not bonding as well with the mother. And breast milk is so important for helping establish a healthy microbiome. Special ingredients in it I won't get into, but very important. And then one of the biggest factors is high use of antibiotics. When my daughter was young, she had constant ear infections. We were told by the doctors, well, just give another round of antibiotics. Well, after 12 rounds of antibiotics, finally put in ear tubes, but that had devastated her gut bacteria. And that's what we've seen in many other children as well. And then also just poor diets. Most Americans don't get nearly enough fiber. And fiber is so important for feeding certain bacteria that produce a substance called butyrate to feed the gut. So basically, those are the historical the medical history issues, which can give you a clue that your child may have some serious gut problems. But the simplest thing to do is we just tell families, look at your child's poop. If it smells bad, if it looks bad, it is bad because roughly a third of the stool is gut bacteria. And so, unfortunately, most people don't ask you, so in the morning, over breakfast, so how was your poop today? That's not a common discussion. So many families, when we tell them, go and evaluate your child's poop, keep track of it for every day for 2 weeks. And they'll come back and say, wow, I had no idea my child had these bad stools, foul smelling stools. I had no idea they were only pooping once every 4 days. And so your gut is 28 feet long. So that can, in many cases, be filled with stool. And that causes a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. And if you've had that for months, you're not going to talk about it every day. It's just part of your life. It just makes you feel bad and causes pain and discomfort. So that's half the story of the obvious symptoms and obvious aspects of medical history.
Yeah, and those are things that we can be aware of. And those are the things that, if you know that there's risk conditions and you went through those initially with birth and with the kind of the delivery method and everything like that, then you know that there is probably a heightened increase for the need to be able to at least observe and potentially intervene. And then you're obviously going to be watching for any sort of behavioral sort of components. I mean, if your child's holding their stomach, or if you can kind of see is that they're constantly in discomfort or pain, we should be attuned to that. And then being able to track the stools, track what they're eating, and track how that's responding within their system, it becomes very important. What are some of the symptoms that are relieved when the bacteria is doing its job correctly? Because there are some very clear symptoms that are associated with autism, whether it's behavioral, social, communicative, even cognitive. I mean, which components are affected directly by that gut-brain relationship?
Yeah. So initially we thought it was mostly just the pain, that it was the pain. Imagine how miserable you are if you have diarrhea for a day. Imagine you have it for weeks, months, years, decades. Surprisingly, in our medical histories of adults with autism, we found in those with GI symptoms, almost all the GI symptoms had occurred in infancy. And in our study of children with GI problems, almost always the problems began in infancy and continued on. So initially we thought it was just the pain and discomfort, and then also some anxiety. When I poop, if you have been constipated for several days, then you may have a very large poop, you may have a very hard poop, and that can be very painful. And that can create a very bad cycle where then you don't want to have a bowel movement, and then it gets worse, even worse the next time. And so that causes a lot of anxiety, I think. And also then you may not want to move very much. You may want to twist your body in certain ways, so that can be a clue. But now we've discovered it goes way beyond there. Now we've discovered that these gut bacteria and yeast, and we should talk a little bit about yeast, but the gut bacteria and the yeast produce these very nasty toxins. And these toxins generally influence either your serotonin system or your dopamine system. And so serotonin and dopamine are two of your major neurotransmitters, and they're very important in affecting your mood. So are you happy or sad? Are you irritated? Do you have anxiety? Do you have depression? Do you have bipolar? Do you have OCD? All very much affected by those neurotransmitters. But also they affect your learning and your memory and your cognition. So I'm going to give you what you may think is a surprising answer, but 13 years ago, we showed in our first study that kids with worse gut problems, all of their language, their social interaction, their behaviors, all correlated strongly with their gut symptoms. And so almost all the core symptoms, the repetitive behaviors, but also many of the comorbid symptoms in autism, seizures, anxiety, depression, irritability, sensory sensitivity, those all we think are related to gut problems in roughly 80% of kids with autism. The reason I say 80% is 40% have obvious gut symptoms, but roughly half of kids with autism have a hidden yeast infection. And the only obvious symptom is worse autism symptoms. The yeast don't cause gut problems, but they release toxins that affect you. A simple example is alcohol. So alcohol is produced by yeast, it's fermented, and it has obvious effects on mental function. It can make your speech slur, make it hard to concentrate, disrupt your emotion regulation. So many neurological effects. But yeast in your gut can produce a lot of much nastier toxins that are 100 times more toxic. So the bottom line is that a simple way to say it is that we have good evidence that about 80% of kids with autism are essentially drunk on the very toxic metabolites from their gut. And yeast metabolites, bacterial metabolites, they're affecting them. But the great news then is when you take that drunk out of the bar and let them detox after a day or two, they can improve. And that's what we're finding too. If we can cut that cycle, we can improve.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an interesting way to be able to conceptualize it, because when you're talking about any sort of behavioral health treatment, when you're talking about any diagnostic or any developmental treatment that's in place, the first thing that you're looking to do is rule out anything medical. And if you're not looking at the full body and how that's affecting the child, is that you're always going to be behind the line. You're always going to be playing catch up because, the biological components are going to keep you from being able to access education. It's going to keep you from being able to access other therapy. So being able to develop new skills has got to be much harder. And it's something where it's going to stunt that opportunity for somebody to be their best selves, to be able to develop and to achieve their goals and their skills and their dreams that they want to be able to do because their body's not allowing them. When you're talking about the treatment, and you had mentioned historically, is that there is for a lot of the pains that were occurring for the autistic populations, that antibiotics were used, whether it's the ear infections. You had mentioned a clinical trial where short-term antibiotic use was utilized. But antibiotics, of course, can't continue for perpetuity. So how is this treatment different? What is MTT, and how is it more natural to what the body should be doing in lieu of using something that maybe is going to contribute to long-term deficits, like an antibiotic if you use it too frequently or too long?
Right. So that's the issue is we're not recommending use of antibiotics by themselves. A national study by the Autism Research Institute of 27,000 families found that on average antibiotics worsened symptoms, not improved them. And that, as I said, I think overuse of antibiotics is a major contributing factor to these gut problems in autism. So what we do is a 3-step treatment with microbiota transplant. We give just a short course of a special antibiotic called vancomycin. It's special because it's not absorbed into the rest of the body. So that makes it very safe. It won't affect kidney or liver function because it just stays in the gut. It's broad spectrum. It kills off a lot of harmful bacteria. Unfortunately, it kills off some good bacteria as well. So that's why just giving it will help temporarily, but then the bad bacteria will just return. So we then follow it with a bowel cleanse to remove as much remaining bacteria and stool from the person as possible. So there's less to reseed the gut. We can't completely clean it, but a bowel cleanse, just like you'd have for a colonoscopy, to really clean out the person helps. And then giving our microbiota, which are from super healthy individuals, the top few percent healthiest Americans, and that makes a huge difference in reseeding the gut. And then those gut bacteria slowly adapt to the person's diet, and then over time, slowly, it's a very gradual process. Usually after 5 to 8 weeks, we see a gradual improvement in GI symptoms. Then a little bit later, some gradual improvement in autism symptoms. What surprised us is that when we finished the study, we were excited. Our first study, we were excited. We saw those improvements, 80% reduction in gut symptoms, 25% reduction in autism symptoms. Then we held our breath and waited 8 weeks and checked up with everyone 8 weeks after treatment had stopped. The benefits were still holding. So that was great, totally unlike just the vancomycin alone. So we published the result and thought we were done. And then a year later, 3 different families came up to me and said, Professor Adams, my son's continued to improve after treatment. So after the third parent told me that, we finally listened and did something rarely done in science. We followed up with every family 2 years after treatment. And to our surprise, we found, sure, most of the GI symptoms had continued, but the autism symptoms, the parents just said, my child was better able to learn and was better able to learn language and social interaction and behavior. And slowly and gradually, they were improving more and more. So now our expert autism evaluator said it wasn't a 25% improvement, so 47% improvement. We went from 80% of the people being severe autism to less than 20% being severe. And half of them were no longer even met the cutoff for mild autism. They still had symptoms, but they had vastly improved. And that was open label study with some placebo effect, but it was so exciting to see that 2 years after treatment had stopped, benefits were continuing.
And I love the fact that there's innovative research out there that's looking at, how can we be able to help support the whole child, and how can we take a look at being able to identify which parts of your body are most affected that are causing the symptoms of autism to be increased. Where are you with that research right now? I mean, obviously, is that you're with any sort of research coming out, is that you're looking to be able to get that FDA approval. You're hoping to be able to take the drug to market. I mean, that's where the goal would be, is that you're helping families. So what's the process right now that you're looking at, as far as you've done a lot of the research, but where's the path leading us?
Yeah. So the bottom line is we're getting closer to FDA approval, but it is a long and difficult path. To put it in perspective, a drug company normally spends $1 to $2 billion to bring a new drug to market. That's how difficult it is. We have conducted 3 studies for autism and 1 study for a rare condition called Pitt-Hopkins, and those 3 studies have showed good benefit and very good safety. We've had 0 serious adverse effects. No one has dropped out of our study due to adverse effects. But that's a good step forward. But with the rare condition I mentioned, Pitt-Hopkins, we're now doing 1 more study, a second study, and the FDA has granted us orphan drug designation and pediatric rare disease designation. That means we just need 1 more study, with which we're doing now, to get FDA approval for Pitt-Hopkins. And so that study's running, and we hope in a year from now, that study will finish, and we hope that will be enough to get FDA approval for autism, for Pitt-Hopkins, in about 2 years from today. So it should be on the market, approved for Pitt-Hopkins in 2 years is our hope. For autism, it's a much longer path. Autism is not a rare disorder, so we have to do, in addition to the studies we've already done, we have to do 1 more much bigger study, a phase 3 study. And that will be the final type of study we need to do, just like our phase 2s, but just more people, more sites. Our collaborators at Harvard Medical School have agreed to be one of the sites, as well as some of our other sites. We need to raise about $20 million to do that. It's not $1 billion. We're very lean and efficient, but we need to raise about $20 million. So that's why we formed a company 2 years ago to raise money. And bless their hearts, 80 autism families have invested in our company. We've raised $8 million, which is what we're doing now. But now we need to raise, and that's enough for us to get approval for Pitt-Hopkins. But now we want to also get approval for autism. So we need to raise $20 million in the next year, and then it'll take us about 2 years to run the study, 1 year for FDA approval. So we're looking at about 4 years from now, we could have FDA approval for autism, which, by the way, would mean it would be covered by Medicaid. So roughly 90% of kids with autism have Medicaid, so it would be free, or essentially free to them. And also it would be very likely insurance companies would cover it then, because it's a very expensive treatment, but we want to make it as low cost or free as possible for families.
Yeah, that's a noble effort that's being put in, and it sounds like you're recruiting a lot of families, but there's got to be people out there who hopefully are listening or are doing their own research that are saying, hey, this isn't a worthwhile investment, because not only am I looking at being able to potentially give something back to my child within their lifetime, but I'm going to be helping everybody else that's behind me coming through that process to be able to learn more. You had mentioned that you haven't identified any safety concerns or adverse effects, which to me might mean that you're going to have a large number of people that might raise their hand as participants to say, hey, you know what, I'd love to be a part of this clinical trial. Is there a way that people can seek this out to say, you know what, I want to be a part of the next trial. I want to be somebody contributing to the science that's being put out there in the research.
Yeah, so people are welcome to go to our website, autism.asu.edu, and they can sign up to be on our mailing list, our general mailing list. And that means when we advertise a study, then they'll be notified about that. But I want to be cautious. We have huge interest in our studies. So normally a site may struggle to get a dozen people over a year. With our most recent study, we had 500 applications the first day, 1,000 applications the first week, for only 60 slots. So our next study, we hope will have several hundred slots, again, provided we can raise the money. And so we'll enroll many more families in that. But I get emails every day from families, multiple emails every day from families wanting to be in our study. And it breaks my heart hearing the stories many of them had. I mean, some horrific gut pains, horrific gut issues. It's very clear that kids have major gut issues, but we just don't have the funding to enroll more people yet. But that's why we're raising money now from autism families, and we hope to get that next study going soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many children, young adults are hospitalized due to the gut pains, the problems that are occurring within that system. And having a solution, having an option, maybe on the horizon, it still instills a lot of hope. Now, there is another product I think that you're working towards that seems very related to this, and maybe you can give me a little bit better understanding of the diagnostic urine test that exists right now that you're working on, and how that coordinates with understanding of the whole relationship between the gut and the brain.
Sure. So we can talk about both our diagnostic test, and if you want, we can also talk about our other treatment, our nutritional supplement that helps somewhat with gut, as well as many other things. But the diagnostic test, the great thing is that from all of our studies, we've been collecting blood, urine, and stool samples, and we've been especially looking for toxic metabolites from gut bacteria and yeast. For example, one metabolite, P. cresol, it's been investigated in 17 studies. Every study of 17 studies shows it's significantly elevated in autism. Not in every child, but in about a quarter of them have high levels of that particular metabolite. And we just had our paper on that accepted. We just wrote a review paper on it. But also there are other toxins as well. So that one affects dopamine. We just published a month ago another paper on indoxyl sulfate. All 6 studies show it's elevated in kids with autism in a subset. That one affects serotonin. So basically, some of these metabolites affect serotonin, some affect dopamine. We've identified up to about 30 metabolites. So some kids have one, some kids have others. But these metabolites are very toxic. P. cresol, when they administered to animals, it causes autistic symptoms in animals in 3 different studies. The exciting thing is that in one of the animal studies, they then treated them with healthy gut bacteria from a healthy mouse, and the mouse recovered from their autism symptoms. So if it works in animals, it's no surprise it's working in humans. And so these toxins, I could go on a bit about the many ways in which they're toxic to the brain, the gut, the kidney, the liver, the immune system, and the mitochondria. And my colleague, Rich Fry, gave a talk last week showing that, and he's really the world's expert on mitochondria and autism. And he led our study for adults with autism. And he showed that in the group that received microbiota transplant, they had big improvements in mitochondrial function. That's incredibly exciting. That's the first study I know that shows we can improve mitochondrial function, a problem in about half of kids with autism, with it. And we've previously shown that in our study with Pitt Hopkins, those kids have really severe mitochondrial problems, and we got them halfway towards normal from microbiota transplant. So anyways, coming back to the diagnostic test. So we measure about 10 different metabolites now in the beta version, and we find that most kids, about 80% of kids with autism, have extremely elevated levels of these metabolites. So that extremely elevated, meaning above that of any of the 50 typical kids in our reference range. And sometimes they're 10 times higher, sometimes 100, sometimes 1,000 times higher than in typical kids. I mean, it's absolutely dramatically different. And so this test is now commercially available through our collaborator. We license the test to them called Analudos, and they're in the UK. So it's just a simple urine test. Just pee in a cup, put it in a tube, mail it off to our collaborators in the UK, and in a few weeks you'll find out, do you in fact have gut infections? Is it bacteria or yeast? And that can be very helpful as clue. We also look at some other things. They also look at gluten and casein, so it can give you clues if a gluten or casein diet might be helpful to you. So that's kind of a short answer. I can give more info if you want.
No, it gives us some direction as far as, there are a lot of treatments that are being looked at right now. There's a lot of ways for us to be able to analyze and evaluate and even diagnose specific gut conditions. And the research is out there. Obviously, with any research, it takes funding, it takes resources to be able to get to that next level. And we all have a role in being able to contribute to that. But the fact that we're looking at these things, that we're evaluating them to be able to create a holistic treatment package so that we're targeting all those components instead of relying on one treatment, is that we're looking at everything that we could help to enhance somebody's life. I find all that amazing, and I think that that's exactly what we should be doing. What advice do you have for families right now? Is that there's so many families out there where their child has, like you said, 80% of children with autism, is that where they're having gut-related issues, and there isn't always an immediate access point. Is this something they should go and talk to their doctor with almost immediately so that they're solving it before it's a problem?
Yeah. So let me answer that in a couple ways. And the first thing we do recommend doing is just look at your child's stool for several days in a row and get a sense, are they constipated? If they are, removing that constipation is important because the longer the gut bacteria are in the person, the more fermenting they're going to do, the more toxins they're going to produce. It's like making wine. The longer the wine ferments, the higher the proof. And so, first of all, encouraging trying to reduce constipation by making sure they're getting enough liquids. Physical exercise is really good to help move your bowels. So that's important. Checking what sort of foods are problematic. Some foods can be very constipating. On the other hand, eating lots of fruit and vegetables can help improve motility. Prune juice, eating prunes can really loosen bowels. So those are some basic food things you can do to begin with. It's not going to remove the infection, but it'll help reduce the effect of the infection by getting those toxins out faster. In the cases, but also again, half of kids with autism have a hidden yeast infection, and the only way to know it is that is by doing the test. A typical symptom is if a child just becomes very giggly, if they're just laughing for no unknown reason. They're drunk, okay? They're drunk on their yeast metabolites, and that's often a good clue. If they have a bad reaction to sugary diets, sugary foods, that's a major clue. The great news is there are antifungals out there that they can use, but they're by prescription, so you need to have a test for these yeast infections. And this is a very novel idea for most mainstream physicians, but we now have a test that you can see, do you have a yeast infection? And if so, get an antifungal. According to the Autism Research Institute and their survey of 27,000 families, of all the medications they looked at, the most effective medications, according to those 27,000 families, were the two antifungals, nystatin and diflucan. They were rated higher than any psychiatric medication for treating autism. And they're very safe. Nothing's perfectly safe, but they're generally very safe. The thing about these antifungals is they'll kill off the yeast, but then it's very easy for it to regrow. So many physicians have told me they need to also go on a low sugar, low starch diet that would feed the yeast. And so often that combination is needed, and multiple yeast treatments may be needed. But at least now we have a test to know it. So those are some great things to do. If I can talk just briefly about our micronutrient supplement. So we developed this special vitamin mineral micronutrient supplement. One of the key ingredients is sulfate, that 90% of kids with autism have a major nutritional deficiency of sulfate. So it's well known for 20 years in the scientific literature that most kids with autism have extremely low levels of sulfate. And sulfate is needed for several things. It's the fourth most common mineral in your body. So calcium is number one, sulfate is number four. But it's almost never given as a nutritional supplement because almost no one has a sulfate deficiency, except 90% of kids with autism. Sulfate helps lubricate the GI tract to help you keep from being constipated. And very importantly, it detoxifies many of those yeast and bacterial toxins. So you can have your child just take an Epsom salt bath because Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate, and our research studies have shown that it's a very great way to get sulfate into the body. Or our vitamin supplement, it's the only study to show that we can increase sulfate in autism, is our nutrient supplement that contains MSM, which is a long name, but basically it's a great source of sulfate. And our data shows very clearly it greatly increased sulfate levels.
And those sound like some very simple solutions for being able to alleviate some pretty large problems. So where can folks go to learn more? I mean, this is a subject that there's not a lot of literature out there, not a lot of people talking on a regular basis, and our listeners probably want to know where those resources are.
Yeah, so they can go to the website for our company that's funded by autism families. It's called Gut Brain Axis Therapeutics.com. And on there, I've recorded several videos, some short videos, just saying here are the standard treatments that can be used to try to treat gut problems, and here are the more advanced treatments. So we also did a study, the largest probiotic study ever done with a couple hundred kids with autism, showing some benefit from certain probiotics. The meta-analysis, another group published a meta-analysis study on probiotics showing that they may have some small benefit in autism, but generally it's not the single strain, it's generally the multi-strain. The way to think about it is a normal person has about 500 species of bacteria in your gut. Probiotics only have a few percent of those. So most probiotics have 1 to 10 species. They're generally the wrong species, the species that grow in milk, not the ones that grow in your gut. But they can have a little benefit. But again, most of them are the wrong species. They're aerobic bacteria. You mostly need anaerobic. But anyways, going to our website, we have brief discussion there of treatments for constipation, diarrhea, the simple things you can start with. But again, talking with a nutritionist, talking with a physician for many of those conditions. But really, we think MTT is going to be one of the best solutions, but that's years away, at least a couple of years away before we get it out for Pitt Hopkins. And unfortunately, the MTT is not allowed except by the FDA because it's not approved yet. So you can only get it in research studies for now.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing on this. And I know that just having that future kind of path to say, you know, there's going to be a solution. People are working hard at finding a solution and that we're not that far away. It gives a lot of hope. So thank you so much, Dr. Addis, for joining us today and giving us a more of an explanation of that relationship between the gut and the brain.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.